Taking a photograph of a 3D landscape can be challenging because obviously the end photograph is only 2D, and often you lose some of the sense of scale and depth in creating that image. But there is something that you can do to maximize the sense of depth in that image, and that's by paying attention to the technique around visual separation. Now, visual separation is a little bit like when you were in primary school and you were writing stories. Your teacher would talk about having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And visual separation is essentially about having a beginning to your image, a middle, and an end, but making sure that the three are slightly separate and conveying that sense of depth. That was the dog, by the way. So a foreground, a midground, and a distance, but ensuring that there's separation, visual separation. So what I've got is I've got some images here to go through where I think in some cases I've not done a really good job, and in some cases I think I have done a good job in conveying the depth of the image and conveying the distance in the image by using visual separation. So the first image I'm looking at here is an image of three boats on a lake in Wales. And I actually talked about this when I was making this image. Now, if you look at the post on the left, the top of the post is touching kind of the foreshore of the lake. And essentially what that does is it breaches the gap between the image in the foreground, or the detail in the foreground, and the midground, and it shrinks the distance. It makes the image feel more 2D because that line intersects kind of the middle distance. But what I did is I raised my camera level a bit higher. So the next image, it's only a small gap, but the next image, I've got a gap between the top of the post and the foreshore. And what that does is it creates a sense of depth. It separates visually the foreground from the midground, from the distance. So the second image feels deeper. There feels as if there's more distance. Even though they're both 2D images, the second image feels as if there's more depth because of the visual separation between the foreground, the midground, and the distance. And quite often visual separation is all about the height of the camera. So there's a bit of a trend at the moment in landscape photography for people to get it down as low as possible. So they'll look for a big kind of foreground detail like a rock or a boat or something like that, and people will get down low and shoot across the rock. What that does is it compresses the image, makes it feel kind of shallower. In fact, I see this on my workshops. People will automatically try and get down low and kind of shoot across the image. But actually to create as much depth in the image as possible, it's quite often really important to be a bit higher to create that separation. So I've got another example here. So go to an image of, one is portrait, one is landscape, but this is a kind of classic example. The first image I've got in the foreground here, this set of rocks and a tree, and then in the midground I have a lake, and then in the distance I've got a mountain. But there's a gap between the rock and the lake, and the lake and the mountains. So my beginning and middle and end are separate, and there's a distinct gap, and you can almost feel the depth of this image. Now, in my attempt to be clever, I shot this next image. I was looking at trying to get this tree to feature. But what I've actually done is I've closed the gap between the rock and the lake. So essentially the rock and the lake just become one big kind of foreground, midground, and the seams, it's almost as if I've compressed the distance. Now, it's also interesting to kind of to look at in the second image. Ignore the fact it's landscape, but the image feels shorter because I've foreshortened the distance. So the second image doesn't work very well in terms of sharing the scale of the image. And then another quick example where I think I took one image which was better than the other, and this would be this waterfall here at Nant Mill in Wales. This first scene, quite a nice scene, but there's not a lot of feeling of depth to it. The water in the distance kind of lacks something. There's something lacking, so it feels quite as if I'm quite close to the waterfall, and kind of not made the most of the foreground. But the next image, I am actually closer to the waterfall, but in some ways the waterfall feels further away, and there's a greater depth in the image. And that's because these rocks in the bottom left provide a sense of scale, but there's also enough space between them and then the midground, which is the smaller falls, and then enough space between that and the waterfall to create a feeling of depth. And I feel as if I'm being drawn into the image. My eye is drawn into the image, where the other image, my eye just wanders around because there's no feeling of depth. And then an example of where I didn't do a very good job in terms of visual separation and creating that sense of depth. This is a scene not far from home here, just off the coast of Hilberry Island. And what I was trying to do is use these rock pools and rocks as leading lines pointing to Hilberry Island. Now, when I look at this image, Hilberry Island's actually quite big, but this image makes it look as if it's just a tiny rocky outcrop, and it looks as if it's just one continuation of these rocks in the foreground, where in fact there's quite a lot of distance. There may be half a mile between where I'm stood and the island, but by not having any visual separation, there's essentially contact from kind of the very front of this scene right up to the island without a break. It makes it look as if the island's small. It makes it look as if there is no sense of space. And I basically didn't do a very, very good job there. If I'd been able to get up higher and look down at a different angle, I could have introduced that sense of space, but unfortunately couldn't do that here. So kind of not great. Then an image where I think I did a reasonable job in creating depth using visual separation. This image here, there's a distinct foreground, there's a distinct midground, and there's a distinct distance, and there's space. Visual separation exists right across this image. So the foreground and the distance are not connected. Although this leading line of the fence with the seaweed on is a nice leading line round across the lake, there is still enough disconnection between the foreground and the distance to create that sense of space and depth. And then always with rules in photography or techniques in photography, kind of try and bend it, try and change it, try and use it to your advantage. So, rules are there to be broken. So here's an image from Trevan in North Wales. And I've actually broken the visual separation rule here because I wanted to create a sense of this path leading straight to Trevan. Well, in fact, at the end of this path, it doesn't go anywhere near Trevan. It turns off to the right. But I got down low, got down close to the ground, and then shot along the path. And it feels as if the path connects straight up to Trevan. And that's what I was trying to create, that idea of kind of telling the story of the path leading to the mountain, which in fact it doesn't actually lead to the mountain, there's a separate path. But by reducing visual separation, the story I'm telling here is, if you're on this path, you're heading to Trevan, which is a little bit of a white lie, but it's about telling that story. So hopefully kind of those couple of examples give you an idea of how you can use visual separation in your images to create more of a sense of depth, more of a sense of distance, and have a better composition. Your landscape photography will benefit from having a thought about visual separation. Just keep in your mind's eye beginning, middle and end. Keep the three separate and you'll look as though your images have proper depth in them. So hopefully that was useful. I'll do more videos about kind of composition as we go along. So if you enjoyed that, don't forget to subscribe. It'd be great for a thumbs up. And if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. And I'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye.